So we find that there was a whole bunch of educational initiatives done before the 1980s, and yet none of them really exist today in any way that we can see. There are some comparable things, and we're going to see those, and probably you've already seen those comparabilities yourselves. But what happened to all of these? Well, the social aspect often destroyed the viability for the educational context. So particularly for television and for radio, the social side of those devices and that medium basically did not make it viable for educational people to provide material for their students. It was really expensive to develop content, and because the technology was changing, it actually became quite expensive to do this. And the fact that some of the changes were quite significant, so changing from audio tape to CDs, essentially made it very, very difficult for educators to convert from one form to the other effectively and cheaply. So it was really expensive. Comment there from Merrick: you can produce 100 or 1,000 or 2,000 cassettes, magnetically recorded materials, and every cassette's the same. That's great. But what a rotten, stinking mediocrity of uniformity are we going to end up with if that first one isn't jolly good? So the idea that you could create something and produce thousands of copies of it, but you couldn't change it for the end user if you realised that you've made a particular error. Really important, and obviously something which has been addressed in the future. It may be that a lot of these technologies just didn't hold on long enough for people to be able to take full advantage of them. If we have a look here, we've got three graphs. One shows the growth of CDs, and the red dotted line is the death of audio tape. So CDs came in and completely destroyed the audio tape market. Relatively slow linear growth, not like the sort of thing we saw before with the printing press and its exponential growth. You'll notice also the DVD graph. The dashed line is the death of VHS or videotape, so same sort of media control as audio tapes. And the other graph is the growth of DVD sales over time, and then reaching a plateau. So we see a linear growth plateau. The other graph there is the audio graph, which shows the another sort of linear growth of general materials that were sold that could communicate audio. So it could be that we just didn't get a particular scenario where the technology lasted long enough for it to take hold. So let's have a look at interactivity. So this here is the Pressey testing machine. Absolutely fantastic looking device there. He proclaimed the benefits of this particular device, spent a lot of time talking about the fact that it gave instant feedback to the users of it. So essentially what you've got here is a box, and it's got 5 buttons on it, and it's essentially a multiple choice question machine. So you push the button that corresponds with the right answer. And some versions of the testing machine actually gave you a lolly or a sweet if you got the right answer. So there was actually positive feedback in the form of food rewards for users. And these are pictures of the feedback classroom devices that were used in some cases. So essentially a whole bunch of buttons made out of wood, which communicated the choices that were made to a central console where the lecturer could see what had been going on. Very, very primitive by our eyes, but certainly very innovative and intriguing at the time. The idea of providing live feedback in the classroom was really attractive to people. That interactivity, engagement with students is something that people felt was going to be really useful for learning and engagement. People use things like pieces of paper with colours on them to indicate answers to questions. So we're talking about multiple choice questions here. So you might say, if you think this is the right answer, hold up the green piece of paper. If you think this is the right answer, hold up the red piece of paper. It gave the lecturer or the teacher an instant clue as to what the students were thinking, and if they saw that there was a whole bunch of colours of something which showed misconceptions, they could address that in a live and prompt manner. Coloured cubes, gadgets made out of wood and bits and pieces, all those sorts of things were used in some way to provide feedback to the lecturer or the teacher about the students' learning. In more recent times, we see clickers or voting systems and online voting systems as well, such as that by Votopedia or things like Socrative. But computers had a lot of power. They could do the drill and practice type learning really quite simply. The idea of just repetitive learning of materials such as timetables or spelling was very, very powerful on early computers. Doing inquiry-based learning, simulations, and tutorials, essentially just going through books and then answering a few questions about stuff that the students had read. All very easily done with computers as they progressed in time. So what sort of outcomes do we get from computer-based learning? Well, studies report varying outcomes. Essentially not too much variation around the no significant difference results. But meta-studies did show small effect size in favour of computer-based learning over traditional methods, and certainly higher than those that we see with video or audio. So interactivity is something that's a little bit more powerful than some of those other means. Other interesting things, effects were larger when the developer of the content was not the teacher, and they found that the instructor was often the main effect. So regardless of what the computing material was like, the instructor often took account for many of the changes that actually happened there. What they did quote was that there was a reduction in time taken to teach at 30%. What they probably didn't take into account was the fact that it takes a lot of time to actually develop the materials prior to teaching. So the advantage of computers, of course, is they can combine the features of audio and video. Not in the early days, that was not quite straightforward. Monitors didn't necessarily show video, and they didn't necessarily play audio in a particularly useful way. But over time, they got more powerful. And they certainly became more cost-effective and faster as well. If we have a look at different computers here, we look at the ENIAC computer, which was made in the late 40s. It basically could do 5,000 addition problems per second. It used a massive 170 kilowatts just to sit there and run, weighed 28 tons, and was basically the size of a pretty big room. And it cost something around about $500,000. In early 2000s, we're seeing something that can do far more in terms of mathematical operations, consumes far less power, doesn't weigh very much, and doesn't take up much space either, and is much, much cheaper. So there was a period of time where computers just weren't getting any cheaper, but over an extended period of time, we're seeing particular drops in the value of these devices. So let's have a look and see what we've got here with computers. So if we go to 1965, we've got a 1 megahertz processor, 4 kilobytes of RAM, a 12-inch mono monitor, certainly couldn't display video in the way that we're used to seeing it, no external storage, a 32 kilobyte hard drive costing a cool $600,000 adjusted for inflation. By the 1980s, we're seeing significant benefits and changes in the sorts of add-ons that are available for it. So there's storage now available in terms of floppy drives. And by 1994, we've got color monitors, we've got external storage, the precursor to USB drives, zip drives. We've got far greater capacity in terms of storage, and we've also got much faster processing speed. Now we look at 2017, we can get quite a lot of power for a far, far smaller amount of money. So we're essentially at a point where the technological aids that we need to use for education are at their most versatile, and they're also the cheapest they've ever been. So, back to the printing press. We see here that unlike the DVD and the CD and other devices that we looked at, which had linear growth, the growth of output from the printing press was exponential, really, really fast over a period of time, but essentially it changed the world by changing everything really quickly. And now we get back to some of the comments that the students made in the quiz that I posted up, which was, what's the technology that's changed the world the most? And a lot of the people said the internet. So let's have a look at the internet. Measures of capacity of the internet, growth of the internet. One of the things there is the internet nodes. And we can see here that there is not quite an exponential growth here, but it's certainly very rapid. Let's have a look at other aspects of it. We don't get to access the internet unless we've got a device to do that. So let's have a look at the devices that we've got here. So this is PC sales worldwide. If we have a look at the growth from 1975 all the way up to 2011, we are seeing a power curve here. We're seeing rapid growth, not quite exponential, but certainly very, very fast. What we're seeing after 2010 or 2011 is a drop-off. Part of that can be accounted for by the existence of tablet sales, but let's have a look at those. So if we look at PC sales and tablet sales up to 2014, we're seeing very powerful growth throughout that market there. So we're seeing unprecedented growth in a device that we can use for education, much like the printing press. Not necessarily an educational device, but certainly something we can leverage for education. And we're seeing a very rapid growth in the internet itself, its capabilities and its capacity, and that's also important. I will put a little bit of a waiver on that. If we have a look at the sales leading up to 2016, what we're seeing is, even with tablet sales factored in, we're seeing a drop-off in worldwide PC and tablet sales. And we're also seeing mobile phone sales are beginning to taper off as well. So there's a little bit of a modifier here. Not quite sure what's happening there. It could just be that we're looking at capacity of some of these devices, but there certainly is a change happening which we need to keep an eye on. But what we're still seeing is we're seeing rapid growth in all these areas, and more importantly, we're seeing a drop in the price of all of these devices. It's actually relatively cheap in many places in the world to access the internet. It's very, very cheap to purchase a computer or a device which will access the internet. And this is the point that we find ourselves in. This is why we want to engage in online learning and the use of technologies in classrooms.